Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. So on the show today, Dylan Newcomb. So Dylan is someone I regard as a friend and a colleague. He is also one of, in my researched opinion, really one of the top thinkers and practitioners in the embodiment field globally. He's someone I have a lot of respect for. I host him in the UK because I want to learn from him personally, actually. He has a solid background in dance, also various kinds of deep thinking like the I Ching, and is the founder of Uzazu, which goes under sort of different titles and different things. We'll get into that. And the first question, of course, is what the hell is that? People are going to have its amazing body-mind method. So, Dylan, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to be here. I'm just coming off a cold, so I don't usually sound like this. I'm a little lower than usual.
You sound sexy. Don't worry. So, how did you get interested in the body? What was your biographical route into this?
How did I get into the body? Well, through my mother, I think, both literally. And my mother has had a lifelong passion for dance. So I grew up with a mother who was a dancer. She started the Belfast Dance Studio in our little town in Maine, USA, which is, well, that was the town. I grew up in this little tiny town of 250 people. And she was passionate about African dance, West African dance to be precise, and children's improvisation dance. Those were her two things. So I grew up around a lot of it. I was always a singer. I was always identified since like 5 years old as a child performer singer, primarily interested in Black gospel music for whatever reason. I think we both had some sort of an attraction to that culture. But I was just dragged along to dance class after dance class. So I just sort of did it, even though it wasn't my thing. I didn't identify with it till I was in my teens. So that's where it started. I mean, then it's taken a long history. I ended up becoming a dancer and a musician, had a 20-year career as a professional ballet dancer, modern dancer, choreographer, primarily in the Netherlands, with the Netherlands Dance Theater.
Can you hit us on this? We have quite a big listenership in the Netherlands, and nobody speaks Dutch except the Dutch and you. So maybe you could hit us with a little bit of Netherlands-ish, so just for our Dutch audience who never ever get to hear it.
Dus er zijn veel. Maar jij begrijpt geen Nederlands, toch? You don't understand Dutch.
No, it works well with a throat infection, though.
Ja, dat is waar eigenlijk. Ja, ik spreek Nederlands. Ik heb 20 jaar in het Nederlands gewoond, dus ik spreek vrij goed Nederlands, zeg maar. Ik denk ook in het Nederlands vaak.
Yes, you're hearing an American who speaks Dutch.
I lived there for 20 years, so I love language in general.
So you were based in the Netherlands, and I know you were doing dance choreography, and you did these great experiments, didn't you, as well, where you'd get dancers in a room and you'd have a grant. So you wouldn't be like, me kind of with the business people who had 2 hours. You'd have weeks or maybe months, and you'd have them moving and making noises and kind of doing all sorts of creative shit, right?
Yeah, I did. I confess. This is kind of a little bit the history background section we're doing here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So let me give that a little bit of context. Because I got to that point in a very specific way. I was always interested in oscillating between movement and sound. Like I went to Juilliard, I did a double major in classical music composition and dance. And then I went off to NDT. And after about 2 years of dancing, I just had to make music. So I started composing for choreographers. And then I had a dual career as a composer for theater and stage, dance and theater. And it was always dance music. There were like two different languages, sound and movement, but they felt to me like they were two different ways to express emotion, to express life, to express different dynamics and qualities of energy unfolding. And I felt like there was a common DNA, but I wasn't trained in that.
Yes.
In that theory. I didn't know the theory of the underlying dynamics of that. And at the same time, there was another track in my life, which was Buddhist meditation. Mm-hmm. I started with Vipassana insight meditation I started with Zen when I was about 13. And then I got into Vipassana like obsessively when I was about 18. So when I had holidays from the dance company, I was, doing the 10-day sits. And so by the time I was 28, I reached a kind of a weird breaking point for myself where I was very viscerally in my body and in my senses with the sound and the movement and doing it and living through it and creating and meaning through that. And simultaneously the Vipassana and the mindfulness was saying, I am not that. The neti, I am not that. I am not that. If I have craving and aversion with that, that's what's creating my suffering. That's what that was telling me and teaching me. And I felt myself more and more caught in this, like getting closer and closer to this paradox point of like, well, what the fuck is it? Which one is it? Which one is true?
Yeah. I think this is not pointed out enough, actually, that a certain approach to mindfulness is being aware of the body, not as a body. It's potentially dissociative or it's potentially distancing, which can be very healthy, right? Like, I'm not this thought telling me that everyone's an idiot, or I'm not this emotional pattern telling me, I'm sad. I'm awareness, I'm something else. But then that's quite different from a sort of embodied trajectory, which is you are your embodied experience. That's self. That's not, yes. That's not a brain taxi. So how are these two things reconcilable?
Yes. And I suspect our conversation will probably arc back more fully on that, hopefully arc more fully back on that as we unfold our talk. But it reminds me of the hero's journey. Like, you have to go away from home to get out of the frustration of that. But do we come home? Embodiment I think the whole embodiment movement is a great next step after the mindfulness movement of the return of the hero to his own home.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm not my mother, but I can also, there's meaning to home. Anyway, so I was frustrated and lost and having my, late early adulthood crisis. And if that's a thing. And so I just quit everything. I just quit meditating. I quit my dance company. I quit everything. And I was like, I need to find out where sound, movement, or sensory embodied experience and consciousness makes sense together. I know there's meaningfulness there. This is the path that my soul or whatever that I'm on. I can't say no to it, but I don't know how to proceed. And I needed to find it out on my own. So because I was successful as an artist at that point, I managed to raise a bunch of money and start a research lab for sound and movement research in Holland called the Dance Lab. And I did it with 5 other choreographers. So it was a collective research space. And I secured for myself this amazing opportunity to just research, to just bring together. I got 6 or 7 interns from the dance university and a few from the music university where I also taught. We just got this space together. We painted the walls and redid the floor, and just dove in. And my original research, which gave birth to Uzazu, this strange sounding thing, was how do vowel sounds affect thought, emotion, and behavior?
And this is really unique. So I never come across a system where sound was so central until I came across yours. Now there are embodiment systems that have some corresponding sounds, or they have mantras, or different. Breath is obviously important in pretty much all of them. But I've never seen one that worked with sounds. And you're a linguist, you study various languages, you come from that background in singing, which is totally foreign to me. And first time I came to your workshop about 10 years ago, actually, in the Netherlands. Time passes, and it's about 10 years.
I remember that. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and it's and you were kind of getting us to make different vowel sounds. Could you just demo one of those so maybe people listening could get a felt sense of it? Because they're quite quick and easy to actually give people a felt sense of, right?
Yeah, well, you have thousands of vowel movements a day, don't you? We all do as we speak. So they're very easy to make. Let me say it this way. One of the first things we did, we'd bring people into the studio. We took some of the 3 most universal vowels are a, u, and e.
Mm-hmm.
99, if not 100% of all languages, of the thousands of languages, have a, u, and e.
And that's different from, say, u, which is like a bit more.
It's a bit of a rarity. Yeah. The French have that, several have that, but we don't have that in English. Yeah. So if you just like a nice open, like push it to its extreme, a la West Coast America. How you doing? I can't really do it that well today.
Kind of outwards moving. Naturally the back starts bending into a flexion.
Arch, yeah. The tongue goes out, the mouth opens. It's very yang, right? It's very going outwards. And so to make that sound, if you imagine yourself as a listener, for those that are listening to this, if you imagine yourself going and just moving your body around with that sound as you make it, just intuitively, my guess would be that you don't curl up instinctively as you make that sound, right? Yeah. You're going to more splay yourself and radiate outwards.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what we were interested in is how does that affect thought, emotion, and behavior? So, in other words, we brought in 200 people over the course of months, about 8 months, and just documented, well, do that for 5 minutes. And what kind of thoughts do they have? How does it affect their behaviors, their social interactions, their emotions, right? And you document that. And we saw very clear patterns, very clear patterns across gender, age, culture.
Yeah. And so while cultures may have a particular leaning, like the French may have more the this quality of preciseness, quality, and I don't know what's the example you sometimes use, like Caribbean, hey man, that R is in the voice, but also in the culture. Actually, everyone will have a certain emotional, relational leaning when they get into that embodiment.
Right. And each culture has their recipe, their glossary of vowel sounds that they use.
Could you give us some more cultural examples? Because that's one of the big themes of the show. The listeners are from all over the world. You have a Korean partner. You've, like me, worked a lot abroad. Give us a more sort of nationality, how the kind of vowels.
Well, let me say opposite to the expansion of the is ooh, as in use, tool, boom, ooze, ooh. Just make that sound for yourself as a listener. Just go ooh. Feel how your mouth is closing. Ooh. If you let your body just go with that, you'll feel your body sort of curling in on itself. Ooh. It's also, just as is the loudest vowel sound, ooh is the quietest vowel sound. Ooh. It's very soothing. It's very grounding. It's very internalizing. It's reflective. It's integrative, as opposed to that expletive out there in your face. Right. So those mark the two extremes. Any vowel sound, this is just phonetically speaking from phonology, it's a space, right? So it has 3 dimensions. Right. There is the forwardness. These are terms from phonology. There's the forwardness or the backness of a vowel. So is very forward, oo's very back. There's the openness or the closeness of the vowel. Right. So you drop your jaw and you open it. Ooh, you close it. And then there's the roundedness of the lips. Right. You have your lips wide, and you have your lips pursed. So that's called rounded or unrounded. Right. A clear distinction would be like E. If you just say easy, that's wide, forward, and closed, right? So with these 3 things, and they're relative, not all vowels are all the way in those three dimensions, right? So that delineates the vowel space, as they call it, the vowel space. And what you do is you take phonetically, if you're cataloging a culture, is you take all their vowel sounds that they use and you map them in that 3-dimensional space. And that's called their vowel harmony. All those points in space that you map, they form a kind of a 3-dimensional space, and that's called their vowel harmony. Now, you just asked that question of, well, what's that connection between culture and vowels, right? Well, if the tendency of those collective vowels is more forward, they're going to talk more forward. They're going to be more here. They're going to tend to be more forward. And now if we bring this into the embodiment space, right, you and I's collective field of expertise, where we know that if we somebody who tends to lean more forward, who tends to be more forward, who tends to enter the space, they're what? They're more social, they're more engaging, they're more assertive, they're more influential, right? They more put themselves in the space.
So now we're in a model of space, which is what your work evolved into. And Strozzi has a model of space. I have a model of space. Laban had a model of kind of space. And I know yours is independent and different from those, but now we're in this model. I find this very useful to go, is that person forwards or back? Are they wide or narrow? Are they more up or more down? And, we could say, okay, like culturally, California more up, I don't know, Russia more down. Right. Any culture on that axis and space as well as sound. So your kind of work, as I've seen it, kind of evolved from primarily being sound at the heart to having space at the heart. Is that fair to say?
Let me just let me retell it this way. It started with vowel sounds, as I was saying. My research started at how do vowel sounds affect thought, emotion, and behavior. We observed a bunch of just concrete data, just what they call in research, just grounded research, grounded theory. Just what are we seeing? And then we sort of essentialized what the body was naturally doing with those vowel sounds into these core movement patterns. They were both movements as the mouth articulated the vowel. We mirrored that with a body motion. You can't see me, but I'm sort of going with my body. Then what we found is that, and looking back on it, it's kind of like, it's one of those like, well, duh, but I was just in it at the time, so I didn't see that's where we were going, is that we went, so if somebody is a little too out there and they want to feel more calm and grounded, why don't we give them some ooh, quote unquote, right? Have them do some ooh and move their body in that way. So it's what started as just a trying to map and understand these dynamics, transitioned into a kind of a prescriptive thing.
I want to jump in here, Dylan. So it's like, this is sort of so what? Because someone might be listening to this and going, what are you talking about? Describing vowels and cultures, and who cares? But it's actually that your system is one of the strongest, quickest, the most powerful state-shifting systems that I know of, in terms of just doing a few movements, a few breaths, a few sounds, and sometimes under the breath or even as a thought. And it's like, wow, I really feel different now. Yeah, I can go to sleep when I couldn't go to sleep. I can manage my boundaries when I couldn't have boundaries. I can connect when I couldn't connect emotionally, or whatever the thing is. I mean, that's really strong and useful work. So there's the mapping of what are my habits, do I want to build something else? And then there's the state shifting in the short term.
Right. Ken Wilber makes this distinction that really struck me early on when I first discovered his work. Back when I was doing this research, actually, about 15 years ago is when I first started getting into Ken Wilber, and he's been a common connective reference for both of us, is that states over time become traits.
Yep.
Right. Is that the more that you're consciously or unconsciously activate a certain state in your body, that becomes habituated for you. That becomes something that's second nature for you to do. Now, building on that, so if we can make a certain sound, I'll just go with this ooh, and we can move our body with it, sort of in symmetry or harmony, in unison with it, ooh, then we can shift ourselves very quickly into that more calm, grounded state. Conversely, if I'm more introverted and I need to get out there, the situation is wanting me to get out there and I'm still, I can use that and I have to be careful. I don't want to over frazzle myself with it. So there's a whole art and science for how to do that skillfully. But I can use that to invite and coax and edge my system out there. Right. And then it took years and years of working with literally thousands of people, and both in private practice and in group situations, to really finesse the how of that, of how do you, particularly when somebody is averse to that state, when, some people go willing, they're like, boom, and they got it in 1 minute and they're like, thank you. I just needed a way to do that.
Yeah.
Other people, it's going to take them a few weeks, if not longer, to work with that pattern until they're able to use it coherently and fully.
Yeah, because it's not as simple as I need more of this, I do more of this, but then actually the whole system can be set up to repulse that. You know what I mean? Like the whole system's just going, no, I don't want to do I want to be crying in my room on my own.
Right.
I want to be quiet inside. I don't want to be out there.
And that can touch on levels of trauma that are unconscious or conscious, and where the body just has this abreaction that does not feel safe to me, right? I'm not going to go there. Amy Cuddy's work comes to mind. I know you're aware of her work is with the power poses, where she made a huge splash with the power of shape.
Yeah.
And its effect on the physiology. And then her work, as many people don't know, but many people do, that her work was then refuted by a lot of scientists got together and ran tests on that, where they went, well, we're not able to recreate
replication issues. Yeah.
And unfortunately, the backlash of Amy Cuddy's work generated a whole wave of research kind of disproving or purporting to disprove the effect of shape on people's capacity to behave in certain ways, to manifest certain behaviors. But when you look at how they were doing that, they were not using any of what we know as embodiment professionals really makes it work.
It was so crude. I saw some pictures of the replications from Switzerland compared to the originals. And to me, they look utterly different. It was like the spines were in a different place. People were clearly breathing differently. People's attention was differently placed. And sometimes just the postures were just plain different. Like, you don't have to be a dance teacher or a Japanese martial artist to see the difference. It was like, that's just different. But the people doing them were academic psychologists who had zero awareness that, for example, the spine being slightly concave or convex
makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Or the breath being in the belly or the chest makes a huge difference. And they just didn't have the subtlety of distinction. And
that's just on the postural level. That's just on the postural level. Yeah. And then how are you coaching these people to attend to the sensations that come up when they're doing that, and work with that and breathe with that and integrate that? That's where a lot of the magic happens. So anyway, so at that time, we're sort of in a tangent-filled version of the evolution of Uzazu here. At that time, I knew nothing of the vagus nerve and of Stephen Porges' work. I knew very little. I was a trained composer and choreographer. I didn't know a lot. And I did not understand why it had the powerful effects that it had. I didn't understand how it worked. I didn't even really study phonology at that time. So I didn't understand the structure of how these vowel sounds were being made. I just knew that this creates that result. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I really spent the first 5 years developing a technique, and I spent the last 10 years trying to understand why it works the way it does and to understand embodied cognitive neuroscience, to understand the vagus nerve and vagal theory, trauma therapy. And that's just been continually over the last 10 years sharpening and honing and deepening the precision of the work that I do.
For those who are new to Porges, and I know he's big in trauma therapy, but not known to everyone, explain the vagus nerve and why that matters here.
Very simply, for now, there is a nerve called the vagus nerve that connects the gut and the heart and the limbic system, and also goes into the throat. 60% of the nerves that innervate the vagus nerve branch out into the larynx and the whole jaw area. So the quality of tone that you pronounce when goes, whatever sound you're making, sends a specific pattern of vibration into the vagus nerve that goes directly to the gut, to the heart, and to the limbic system, synchronizing all three. Now, when a mother holds their baby and makes little the tone of that is one of the primary ways that the baby gets emotionally regulated.
Right. And later in life, it may be singing, it may be chanting in a Buddhist context or a football context. There's lots of ways that we socially use vocalizations.
Yes.
Sophisticated.
Yes. Even, and how the whole language forms even when the baby's in the belly, the tone of the mother's voice is being imprinted, and literally the sensitivity of the ear is being optimized around the vowel harmony of the mother, even in the belly. My wife, to this day, even 10 years after being here, she still can't hear sometimes if she's saying R or L, being Korean as she is. And my daughter and I, my daughter's 7, we try our best to be patient and respectful and not laugh at her. This sounds terrible, I know, but sometimes she'll for a month, she'll say her R's correctly. And then all of a sudden she'll go through a week of like just saying L's instead. And we're like, really? Seriously? But neurologically, at that fundamental stage, she didn't develop the capacity to hear the difference.
Yeah. I remember at university, I'm from a part in England where 3 and 3 are the same auditorily to me. And it took about 6 months at university for people to say 1, 2, 3. And I'd say 1, 2, 3. And that just in my head was the same thing. And I literally couldn't hear. Eventually I went, and they were like trying to help me put my tongue, because it sounded, in America that sounds cute, but in Britain it sounds really rough. It sounds kind of common. It's like, the thing is, mate, it's very working class. And I was at this university where people were just laughing at me because of it. And I had to sort of try and put my tongue in the right place. And to this day, if I'm not thinking about it, I'll say 3 instead of 3. I have to consciously put my tongue there. So these patterns are quite kind of hardwired, That was just
they are. They are. Now, because my research started with this inquiry of sound and movement, it started as this existential integration challenge, but also as this composer self, dancer self integration challenge that I'm not busy with these days. I'm no longer an artist in that same sense. I was very focused on these vowel sounds. Now I hold them in a completely different way than I did 15 years ago. Now I see them as one key possible input into the system.
Because in a way, where do you start? Do you start with shape? Do you start with subjective feel? Do you start with sound? Because they're a coherence, right? Like they're all parts of a whole, and you could map it around shape. You could map it around sound. You could map it around subjectivity. You could map it culturally. There's different ways to map that, because they're all sides of one thing.
Yes. Exactly. I have come to use spatial dynamics, what I call spatial dynamics, or space and shape, as my central organizing principle, together with that plays out very differently in different domains, which I think we'll have time to get to a little bit in a moment, and with that, together with that, is what I refer to handily as yin and yang, which is, practically speaking, simply compression or contraction and expansion, right? So am I on the sagittal axis, so the axis from back to front? Am I going back, which is away, which is more in, that would be yin, or more out towards the world or to you, which is more yang? Am I going down, which would be more into sensing, sinking into feeling, or more up into a motor response? Now, some people I realize might be going, why is he saying down is sensing and up is motor response? That's a longer conversation, perhaps. But my mind's going, should I go there? Should I go there? Maybe that's
I think it might be a bit in depth. I would encourage listeners to play with dimensions generally, and particularly if they're sort of newer to somatic practices, or they've just got one somatic practice where this isn't explicit, is, working with down and up, or out and in, or forwards and back. Just experientially, I'd encourage people to play with that. Maybe they're sitting on the subway in New York, or they're walking through the streets of Brighton, and it's like you can play with this as you just walk or sit, can't you? Like, how would it be to be narrow now? How would it be to be more forwards in this conversation? Like, that's a fascinating thing to play with.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the lateral dimension of I don't do right and left, I do narrow and wide. So inwards towards my midline, or towards my center, or outwards into relating to the space around me. Now, I mentioned that. Oh no, let me first just circle back on the vowels. So I used to see vowels, and because it was that way in my research, as sort of the whole sound as the seed of creation, which is also a popular thread or mythological thing in Hinduism and so forth. And I can totally get inspired by that story as a musician. But from an embodiment standpoint, even sound happens in space. Sound is waves in space. It's just a particular kind of vibration or kind of movement of energy in space. What I have found is that as I was studying then the body, like, oh, so when we make this sound, the body tends to move that way. Then I started analyzing this dimensionally. What I found, however, and this was greatly influenced by Ken Wilber's work, is that, well, there are different kinds of spaces in a way. There's my emotional space, which is related to but distinct from my interpersonal space, right? There's even the space of my behavior and the dimensions of my behavior. I could talk about my behavior from a dimensional perspective, but I could also talk about my functional roles that I'm taking, right? So I could be, let's pick an example. Let's stick with emotions and roles, for example, because those are very clearly, almost a kind of a polarity. An emotional state could be sadness, right? Now, if I was to say, does sadness go more back or more front? Well, it goes back. It tends to go away. As a general inner movement, does it tend to go down or up?
That's the easy one. Yeah.
Sadness goes down. Does it tend to go wide and expanses, or does it tend to collapse in and go narrow towards its
Yeah, sure. Narrow. Yeah.
Right.
No, but I once asked a 10-year-old child, I said, which direction's joy? And she jumped up in the air. Like, this was a 10-year-old child that got the answer within 2 seconds.
Right.
There's something very instinctive. I mean, the language, we talk about being down or depressed, right? There's linguistic elements to this.
So for somebody that is caught in their sadness and can't get out of it, one thing that I would tend to do is have them navigate explicitly their body into it by going back, shifting back a bit, shifting down and shifting narrow, just to sort of like align their physical body with that state.
And if you can do something deliberately, you can spot that you're doing it unconsciously.
Exactly, Mark. Yeah. And then gently have them bring their emotionality with them and gradually move up and gradually move forward and gradually move out.
Yeah.
Right. There's lots of nuance to that, and that might not be the direct thing I do, but the overarching theme is that. Right? Yeah. And I might just even that simply do that can work fantastically sometimes. Now back to the vowel sound. I might have them, and I very often do have them make the vowel sound ooh. Why? Because that's another key neurological input through the vagus nerve that will speak right to their gut, right to their heart and their limbic system simultaneously. That'll entrain that same vibration, that same yin-yang dynamic, and send it right into their body. Ooh, ooh. Imagine somebody who has a really hard time feeling their sadness.
Yeah.
Say, move back, down, in. Now just go, ooh, ooh. It affords them a gentle, grounded experience of their own sadness.
And it's a quick, powerful in. These sounds I find they're difficult to resist almost, So I want to point to something here. There's an interesting combination in your work. So on the one hand, you're an artist. You're coming from a dance background, performance, the creative side. And there's not that many artists in certain sections of embodiment, particularly in the leadership side of embodiment. They tend to be sort of martial arts people, maybe body therapists.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But also you're a deep theoretician. I mean, you can't see it here, but the flip chart that we were playing with last time we were here, there's all these crazy like mathematics on it and things from the I Ching. Do you remember you were drawing on the flip chart?
Oh, do you have it right there?
Yeah, it's right next to me. Rachel Blackman was looking at it earlier today and saying, what the hell is that? So it's the sketchings of a genius madman. And, because it's sort of, you've got maths on there, you've got physicality, you've got diagrams, you've got Chinese philosophy. And so on the one hand, there's this artistic tendency in what you do. And then there's also this very deep intellectual research orientated that has both the sort of Eastern perspective, like I know you're very into the I Ching, for example, but also you're very likely to get out a thing of research and say, well, these are the 12 theories of personality in the ocean, and with these journal says this, and the counterpoints to Amy Cuddy say this. I find that combination quite interesting, and I don't know anyone else that has quite that same combination.
Don't know what to say to that. Yeah. I seem to be that way. It's been an evolution. Like currently for the last, 5 years and even more, I think it's even more in the last 3 years. I probably spend about, on an average week, 20 hours a week in Google Scholar.
Wow, that's a lot. So looking up the kind of evidence base, and because a lot of somatic people would say, listen, somatics is all about the felt sense, it's personal. I don't need to look at a research paper because I'm feeling. They've sort of thrown out the baby with the bathwater. They're saying, why would I need to look at a research paper? I can feel. What would be your response to that?
I like this question.
Like, why do you spend 20 hours a week on that? Like, I'm playing devil's advocate here. I actually respect it tremendously, and I can imagine.
Well, let me respond with a very specific instance where reading a specific article that I stumbled across through just by always being in Google Scholar and looking at clicking on that link that says, 13 articles cited this article, and then digging deeper into the rabbit hole. Yeah. And I put myself in the spot because right now I am not remembering his. Wait a minute, let me go to Bookends. My favorite program for research is called Bookends. Okay. Shout out Sunny Software and Bookends. Import all if you collect a mad amount of PDF files, you need a citation manager where you can just so what I do is when I get interested in a topic, I create a smart folder for it. And then I take all my PDFs and I always, I write in all the keywords of that thing so that I can always look things up by keyword. And on the short term, it's a pain in the butt, but in the long term, a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, then I can just look up per keyword.
Your true calling as a librarian, Dylan. I feel like you've missed a career.
God bless the librarians. Yeah. And God bless the age of metadata. It's all about the quality of your metadata. God, that's a good metaphor actually on multiple levels, right? It's like having context. And that's a lot of what, I'm going to embarrass myself publicly here by saying I don't remember at the moment the researcher that found this out. But so it turns out that for information to come from your sensory system into your conscious awareness, it takes about 500 to 700 milliseconds. So when we say, be in the now,
yep.
Feel it in the moment.
It's the near past.
On a rough level, it's true, but on an exact level, it's impossible.
Right. We're always living in the near past. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the plot thickens because if we had to wait a half a second to actually feel something to then move on and take the next step in our lovely little sensory motor loop, whether we're using it to drive our car or brush our teeth, we would be at a sloth's pace or slower than a sloth, right? So we need something to keep the ball rolling in that gap where we don't really have a data refresh from our sensory system into our conscious awareness. So brilliant us, we've created the efference copy. They call it an efference copy, where what we do is based on prior experience, awareness serves up a version of what we're feeling, of what it expects to feel, and it fills it in. And only until it's proven, if the data comes in and it matches or reasonably enough matches, then we're good, and it never pings it to our awareness. So we were never the wiser. But sometimes we were expecting something, and then it doesn't match that efference copy. Yes. And it's like, whoa. Have you ever had? I'm sure you've had that, where you go to drink some water and it's milk, or vice versa.
Yeah. I was just thinking of, you go to sit down and the chair's not there, or you go to, as I said, something and it's not what you thought it was. And there's this moment where your body was, because I even register it as, say, sweet, and then it's salty. I drank
that's another one.
Yogurt that's terribly salty, and I expected it to be sweet like lassi, and it just wasn't. But it took a couple of seconds for my mouth to go, no, that's not what you're telling yourself it is.
Or on this, and exactly, or on the stairs, and there's one more stair, but you didn't know it. Yeah. And it rocks your reality for a moment, right? Yes. You're totally off kilter for a moment. That's because of that efference copy gap. So the thing is, what I said a moment ago, the effort for that to be pinged to our reality of, mismatch, it has to be a significant mismatch. It has to be a really significant mismatch. There's a kind of a margin of acceptable error in our consciousness where, like, if it's just a 30% error, I'm making up a random number here. If it's a 30% error, it doesn't get served up. So it's good enough. The implications of this for how we do sensory motor integration, for understanding the mistakes that we make, and how trauma repatterns us and distorts our reality ongoing. If I could have worked for 10 years in a studio with dancers and never found that shit out. Like, right. It was dudes doing really specific timing experiments with a computer. Yeah. But now that I know it has significantly improved the quality of the trauma work that I do. That's the work that I do in other areas. So that's just a specific example.
And there's a humility to saying, you know what, subjectivity is really important, and our world underrates it, and feeling and intuition are really important in a way that's underrated. And there's certain blind spots around that. And there's certain patterns that only come out when you look at data over time. You know, like I had a measure my happiness, and I didn't realize I was less happy on average on trains than when I was walking. But the data was really there. And as soon as I'd seen the data, I went, and I really felt it. And the next few times I was on a train, I was like, yeah, I am a bit not as happy. Maybe I should be on trains less. But it was only seeing like it was like 200 data points that I went, that's 0.5 off or whatever. And I don't think I would have actually made that subjectively at any one point. I'm not seeing the pattern. I was just seeing, right now I don't feel that happy, but maybe that's because it's raining today.
Right. Awesome. This brings us into something that I'm very passionate about, which is assessment development. It has been developing a suite of reliable and valid embodiment assessments. Has been something I've been working on for the last 10 years, on and off. It's a long-term commitment of mine. I feel that with such sweeping advances in embodied cognitive neuroscience and the embodiment field in general, and we now understand much more about the importance of it and the relative lack of it, and how our current culture just exacerbates the imbalance of not being embodied and not having sensory motor integration and many other things. That if we know that we need it, and we know that we need to help people improve it, then we need a way to measure it, right? To see who needs what, for one, who needs what really, that is a way that is reliable and valid. So we know what we're talking about, not saying, I think they need that. I think they need that. And every guru can say, you need my technique.
We can measure someone's cholesterol level and say, wow, this person's got a real risk here, or a person's blood iron levels and say, wow, this person has too much blood iron, or this person needs to take an iron pill because they're anemic. And we can measure that. But to say someone is too embodied or not embodied enough, or that they're embodying something unhealthy, it's really difficult to put something on that. An opinion.
Yeah. And all the experts so many of the experts like you and I that are saying you need this. Well, we're also trying to sell you something, aren't you? We want you to buy our course and come to our workshop. So how are you going to trust us? So if we can have reliable assessments that are agreed upon, that can be independently validated, that can point to real pains in people's lives and link them to embodiment-related mechanisms or causes, shall we say.
So what that might look like would be like, hey, you need more yang in your body. We understand you have an issue with boundaries. This would really help you hold better boundaries if you had more of this embodied capacity of sort of a firm kind of outward-facing yang.
Yeah. And there's kind of, if we simplify it down, there are two essential ways that this can and should work. One is starting with thoughts and behaviors and feelings, and just like a standard assessment, or like a non-embodiment based assessment, but that the research has done that if your answers to these questions are directly traceable back to inferences about your embodiment patterns that can then be acted upon by, professionals or techniques or whatever, right? So like we just were talking about forwardness. If somebody is answering all these questions of, oh, I need to always be around people. I get really stressed out when I'm alone, right? We know then that, oh, this person has trouble being more back.
And you could predict that. I mean, guests, interestingly, I'd say people listening to guests on the podcast, based on what they're saying and the tone of their voice, it's quite easy to guess how their embodiment might be set up. Like it's fairly intuitive for people hearing voices to get a sense of it.
Yeah. And then, so one is, in other words, patterns of behavior in thought and patterns in behavior and feeling and thought can be inferred to embodiment patterns that can then be worked with directly, and then can then in turn influence and improve the patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. And on the other hand, I think synergistically with that, and what I've been working on developing, is movement-based, body-based assessments, which is what I do like in my workshops and in my webinars. Okay, stand what I call neutral posture, slowly move outwards towards the other person and just notice, do you become more calm or less calm? How do you feel? How does that change your feeling? Oh, I become anxious when I move towards the other person. Right. And that can expose in a very direct way stuff, patterns that they might not have been aware of. And it simultaneously fosters awareness within the context of their own body. So they're making those direct connections right away.
Yeah, and they're making them for themselves. I like this method of, we'll get people to do different embodied yoga principle shapes, and it'll be which are comfortable, which would you rather stay in, and there's different reasons for that. It could be, 4 elements or whatever, some sort of model. And then they make the assessment themselves. Oh, this one, I'm like a pig in shit. This one, I'm totally at home in. But this one, no, can we quit? I've had enough. And they'll step out of it. And I'll be like, no, come on, back into it. And then they work out for themselves, like, okay, this is my habit. Because it's hard. If someone said you cross your left arm over your right, or the other way around when you cross your arms, you might not know. But if you've got people to try crossing their arms both ways, they go, oh, that one feels totally weird.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So the last piece that I guess is really good to touch on here in terms of assessment is then if you by having reliable assessments, we can diagnose, right? We can see what's going on. Then we can make that much more skillful, appropriate recommendations of what kind of practices to do when for which person. And we can track improvement, can't we? We can see, oh, now that person can do that more easily. How much easier? 30% easier. Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, there's a capacity there. Like we video people on EFC doing the 4 elements, and then we video them 6 months later, and it's like, are you actually able to step into that more? That's and putting numbers on that can be quite tricky, but usually it's pretty obvious to an untrained observer, like, oh, they got better at that one.
Yeah. So my vision for embodiment is that it 10 years out, 20 years out, but even 10 years out, is that it becomes that it starts being welcomed not only into companies and organizations, but into schools, into elementary schools, into high schools, into college programs, that an embodied approach to emotional intelligence, social intelligence, values training, that these become more and more fundamentally embodied. So we're not looking at PowerPoints about emotional intelligence, that we're not trying to memorize 5-point lists about how to be more socially intelligent. Like to do that in an authentic, fully integrated way means you got to bring the body into it. It is a fundamentally embodied thing.
There's a misunderstanding about what learning is, whether it's in corporate or in schools or in therapeutic context, that learning isn't just getting data from one person's head into another, that any useful learning, whether it's about parenting or leadership or whatever, is about a way of being. And if people can't learn that, then memorizing lists ain't going to help much.
Right. So I believe that having these assessments that are really top notch and, up to muster in terms of validity and reliability will both enable that scalability and that integrability into those kind of systems. right? Oh, you've got a valid assessment, and we can track improvement, and we can demonstrate to our funders or to our board that, look, we have a 30% improvement in happiness, and we can track it to this embodiment training that people have been doing. Like, they can manage it because they can measure it, and they can justify its place on the budget.
Yeah, and this is what mindfulness did, is like kind of everyone kind of knew that meditation was a good thing, and anyone that had done it knew it subjectively. But it wasn't until Kabat-Zinn came along and said, okay, you get a 30% reduction in rates of depression, and that's 5% higher than medication, actually. I'm just making the numbers up, but like did the numbers and said, this is what you'll get from a standardized 8-week mindfulness course. And I'd point listeners to Helen Payne, Payne, who's doing research on medically unexplained symptoms and embodiment. We did an episode with her, and she's the sort of, I regard her as a sort of John Kabat-Zinn of embodiment in many ways, Helen Payne. And well worth looking up if people are interested in this sort of measurement of embodiment. And there is some resistance to it, I found, in the sort of in a field which defines excellence in terms of subjectivity. There is some resistance to this.
Yep.
Just writing that down.
Yeah, I'm writing down Helen Payne.
The podcast's a good place to start.
Great. Cool. I wanted to circle back on this notion of space and different spaces. It's easy to say, for those that start getting interested in directions in the body, it's easy to get confused when you see there's 3, 4, 5, 6 different systems. Oh, so-and-so says when I move forward, it's about this. Or when I move up, it's about that.
Yeah.
And what I would say is they could all be right.
Mm-hmm. They
could all be right. Just ask yourself, what is, either they've said it explicitly somewhere, hopefully they have, or they didn't, is that they had a point of view when they were mapping that.
Yes.
They had a point of view when they were mapping that. They were trying to solve for something. They were trying to solve a certain problem, so to speak, consciously or unconsciously. And what is that? And that's kind of the key to unlocking the specific goodness of their mapping.
Yeah, it's like, first of all, there is a lot of crossover. Like, no one says sadness is up that I've ever come across.
Right.
And secondly, like, it's like, well, what are you exactly trying to model there? Like, what is that a map of exactly? And someone coming from, say, a dancer's perspective, like Laban, has got a different point of view than someone who's coming from a therapeutic perspective.
Right. And so a lot of what I've been focusing on in the last 6 years is taking clues from integral theory and integral theorists, Ken Wilber and several others, is going, okay, so when we're in an emotional space, how do we map that? And how are those dimensions and movements inherently different? What makes that cartography meaningful and useful, as opposed to functional roles, as opposed to relational values, right? And creating distinct, inherently valid and valuable sets of mappings.
Go on, finish that.
And what I find is that you can use the vowel sounds and you can use the body as a kind of, it's really trippy, as a vehicle to put you in any of these different locations, in any of these different spaces. So meaning that's the power of the mind to sort of set context, right? If I say out there is a pile of red beets, I hate red beets. They make me want to vomit. I'm sorry, but they do. My wife loves them. My daughter loves them.
Apologies to the Slavic listeners for this blasphemy. You can hear now.
Yeah, I know. I might have people unfriend me. Fine. Is what if I imagine beets out there, my body moves back. And if you also say, okay, here's a pattern of data, analyze it, my body also moves back, right? To get the big picture and to see the overview and to try to see the patterns.
Yeah.
My body's moving back for two completely different reasons.
Right. So in the first case, it's repulsion. In the second case, it's perspective.
Yes.
They're both backwards, but depending on and this is quite trippy, as you say, if you really start to think about it, like what is the context that's set there actually creates a very different. Listen, we're kind of running out of time here, and I'm aware this has been fairly theoretical and deep and clever, which I appreciate. And I imagine a listener that hasn't been to one of your workshops, which I'd highly recommend, by the way, and that's coming from someone who's very fussy. give us some practical examples here. Can you give us an example of a client you helped maybe change their name, or a corporation you helped? I'd love to hear of some very specific, just in 5 minutes, like one or two specific cases.
Protecting confidentiality.
Like, what are some of the common things? Like, you've worked with life purpose, money issues, marketing stuff. I know you've worked with
the gamut. I would say, let me answer it this way, and if you want me to circle back and be even more specific, I'm happy to do that. But what I have found again and again is that when people have the opportunity to move consciously with awareness their body back in relationship to another person, forward, let's just take interpersonal for right now, that's a huge one. Back, and then learn to regulate being separate from another person, comfortable there, forwards into the down, being close with and learn to regulate there, into their sensory and to regulate there, into their motor, inside and outside, narrow and wide. An amazing amount of energy starts to be released very quickly. One of the first things that people say is, oh my God, I have so much more energy now. Because energy is a flow of information between two different poles. Energy is the flow between two poles. It's the spark across the gap, right? And so when you tap into key polarities and you restore conscious embodiment to each pole and then practice connecting them, you're literally flowing the juice of embodied consciousness. And the system just starts to come to life again. Yeah.
It takes a certain effort to hold oneself in place in what is a natural flow.
Yeah. The second thing I'll say is that people go, oh, well, how do I apply it? How do I use it? In Uzazu, it's an inherently relational technique. So we're always working in relationship to something, almost always. Sometimes we'll pull it apart and just work on a certain state. But that state came into being, for better or for worse, in response to something, right? So we always want to keep working in that contextual, dynamic way, that we are practicing connecting to somebody, or holding our own with somebody, or opening to somebody, or opening to ourselves in the face of a certain kind of person, so that when we're in that situation, our body instinctively adopts the right pattern. Oh, it's time. So the body starts to go, oh, it's time for me to be assertive. I'm going to be assertive. Oh, it's time for me to just be empathic and like feel them. Oh, I can do that. That's not unsafe.
Dylan, I think we need to wrap up now, unfortunately, because I could easily, maybe we'll do a follow-up, because I feel like there's always so rich with you, and that we could do another couple of hours on this and just scratch the surface. So for now, let's pause this, and we're not going to tell listeners why it's called Uzazu. They can be teased by that. And don't tell them. No, don't tell them.
Okay.
Where could they find out more about your method, though, if people were so inclined? What's a good place to start?
They would need to go to uzazu.org, which is uzazu.org.
Okay, so that's the place to start. And is there anything else you'd recommend they check out, like videos or?
Well, there's a free webinar on that, and I'd just say that's the place to start. Just sign up for that. It's a replay of a webinar, so you can just do it, and it's really a mini workshop in these first two dimensions. So you get to go through them and experience it.
If people are in the UK, you're coming to the UK. We just confirmed dates, didn't we? September. Let me see. We literally just confirmed it before.
3rd, 4th, and 5th.
Great. So, and you'll probably be, I imagine, in Amsterdam or Paris or something around either side of that. If I know you.
Exactly. Belgium, Brighton with you, Paris, Amsterdam, and Moscow. I'm going to be in Moscow. Yep.
Who's hosting you in Moscow?
Alexandra.
Oh, Vilya. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
My EFC colleague there. I think I recommended you to her, and she came and visited you in Paris or whatever. So
exactly.
That's good. The Russians get the best there is. So I highly recommend.
And all those dates are on my website as well. All those places.
Great. All right. Do you have a closing message about the body?
In every moment, in any moment, asking yourself or just reflecting intuitively, is there a way that I can even more easily and fully drop into my body, be with the energy and information there, and let that flow back out into what I'm doing, who I'm being, and what I'm doing in this moment.
Dylan, concise and profound. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure as always, Mark. And I look forward to potentially a follow-up. That'd be lovely to keep going.
Let's do it. Let's do it. A, just because I like learning from you, and B, because it's good promo for you coming here. So let's do it.
All right. Cheers, mate.
Subscribe to get more. And you can also leave us a review on iTunes, which helps with our rankings. So really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support the podcast even more, then fund us. Go to Patreon. Give us $1 per episode. Those who don't know, Patreon's a really good way of supporting things you want to see more of in the world. I know like so much is available for free now, and what I'd say is a lot of energy and effort goes into this podcast. I put it out there for free so everyone can get it. Maud and I work on this. Everyone that wants it can have it for free. And if you want to support us, it is really appreciated. So it's patreon.com/Mark Walsh. And of course, if you want any in-person training, you can visit embodiedfacilitator.com. There's loads more resources there too.
Till next time, welcome home to the body.